Emotional and educational story. The cabin was quiet, quiet except for the muffled sobs of a young mother and the high-pitched wailing of a baby who couldn't settle. Rows of first-class passengers adjusted noise, cancelling headphones, brows furrowed, eyes averted. The flight hadn't even taken off yet, and already the tension was thick. She stood at the front, clutching her baby, flushed with embarrassment. Her seat was at the back. Economy, tight, cramped, and now also judged. She whispered apologies as she bounced her baby, tears brimming with fatigue, frustration, and shame. From row 2A, a man noticed, not the noise but the desperation. A single dad himself, he had seen this look before. Not on planes, but in waiting rooms at daycare centers, on nights when he rocked his daughter to sleep, praying she'd forget the absence of a mother he couldn't bring back. He didn't speak. He didn't signal a flight attendant. He quietly unbuckled, grabbed his coat, and approached the mother. No dramatics, no need for recognition. He simply smiled and said, "You can take my seat." The mother blinked. "No, I couldn't. You can, you should, you're doing great." The baby stopped crying. Just like that. Maybe it was the new space. Maybe it was the relief in his mother's body. Or maybe babies sense peace the way we sense tension. Whatever it was, the moment calmed. He didn't explain that he was a single dad. He didn't tell anyone that he hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight in a year. He didn't mention that this trip was his first vacation in a decade. He just walked to her seat in coach, sat down, and smiled. As the flight continued, people went back to their movies, their wine, their books. No one clapped. No one took a photo, but one woman held her baby, resting for the first time in weeks, and one man sat quietly, heart full not from privilege, but from presence. Educational reflection. This story teaches more than kindness. It teaches depth. In a world that often rewards loudness and spectacle, there are still people who lead with heart. It reminds educators, parents, and leaders, emotional intelligence isn't optional, it's essential. When we speak about role models, let us not only point to public figures or influencers. Sometimes the truest educators are the ones who act when no one watches. Let this story be a curriculum in humanity, for our children, for our communities, and for ourselves. Empathy isn't always loud. In fact, the most profound acts of empathy are often quiet, unnoticed, and uncelebrated. They happen in the still spaces of life, where one human recognizes the silent suffering of another and responds, not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because their heart compels them to. In a world increasingly focused on performative gestures, social media validation, and curated appearances of kindness, the quiet empath reminds us that genuine compassion exists outside the spotlight. This kind of empathy doesn't announce itself. It listens, it sees, and it acts with humility. Empathy is not merely feeling sorry for someone. It's the ability to truly feel with them, to pause your own reality long enough to imagine what someone else is going through. That mother with the crying baby, she's not just being disruptive on a flight. She could be on her way to a funeral. She might be escaping a difficult relationship. Maybe she hasn't slept in days. The crying isn't just noise. It's the soundtrack of her exhaustion, her loneliness, her anxiety about being judged. And yet, it only takes one quiet act to change that narrative. One person who doesn't just hear the noise but listens to the pain behind it. When a single dad gave up his first-class seat without making a fuss, he taught us this. Empathy doesn't need a microphone. He didn't tweet about it. He didn't call the attention of the crew. He simply saw someone in need and gave them comfort at the cost of his own comfort. In educational terms, this is emotional intelligence in action. Understanding and managing not just one's own emotions, but also recognizing and responding to the emotions of others. Quiet empathy is powerful because it transforms spaces. It doesn't shift attention to the giver. Instead, it shifts dignity to the receiver. That mother, overwhelmed and ashamed, suddenly felt seen, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person worthy of care. Her emotional experience was validated not with words, but with action. That's the kind of lesson that cannot be taught in textbooks, but must be modeled through behavior. In classrooms, families, and workplaces, We often overlook quiet empathy. We focus on loud achievements and obvious acts of charity. But true emotional literacy is shaped in those small, seemingly insignificant moments where we choose to care. When a teacher notices a child staring blankly because they didn't have breakfast. When a student silently helps another carry their books after a bad day. When a colleague refills the coffee pot even when it's not their job. These are the echoes of a culture rooted in deep, silent compassion. The challenge with quiet empathy is that it doesn't feed the ego, it doesn't ask for something in return. It requires a strength that comes from internal alignment, a knowledge that you did the right thing simply because it was the right thing. And that's rare. It's countercultural in a society obsessed with metrics, likes, and validation. But it is also the most sustainable form of kindness because it doesn't burn out. It doesn't depend on being seen. Quiet empathy also shapes the identity of those who receive it. The mother who sat in that first-class seat likely felt something shift, not just physically, but emotionally. Her story now holds an example of goodness. It might change how she raises her child, how she views strangers, how she tells her story to others. And the child, though too young to remember, will have absorbed that feeling of calm that descended when one human helped another without words. This story, and the key lesson it offers, calls us to ask ourselves, how often do we miss these moments? How often do we stay seated in comfort because standing up would be awkward, or go unnoticed, or cost us something? What if we chose to act regardless? Empathy, when it's quiet, is perhaps most authentic. It's not performative, it's not strategic, it doesn't sell, but it heals. And in today's fragmented world, that healing is perhaps the most urgent lesson we can teach and learn, again and again. Single parenthood, particularly single fatherhood, is often misunderstood and underrepresented, yet it holds within it a deep well of emotional intelligence and resilience. When we think of emotional intelligence, we often consider it as a skill or trait learned through deliberate effort. But for many single parents, it becomes a necessity of life. Being both the emotional and practical anchor for a child means developing heightened awareness, sensitivity, and adaptability. It is through the lens of single parenthood that we begin to understand how lived experience can cultivate a profound ability to empathize and act selflessly in everyday situations. A single father often walks a path filled with contradiction. Society may admire him from a distance, but still question his ability to nurture, to comfort, to mother, in the ways we're conditioned to expect from women. Yet, in the silence of his everyday routine, packing lunches, brushing hair, managing school meetings, drying tears, he becomes attuned to emotional nuance. He learns to read unspoken words, to detect a shift in his child's voice, to manage his own stress without passing it on. These are not just acts of duty, they are the building blocks of emotional intelligence. This intelligence doesn't stay confined to his home. It radiates outward in public spaces, in moments just like the one on the plane when he saw a mother struggling with a crying baby and recognized not just the disruption, but the deep emotional weight behind it. He knew what that kind of fatigue felt like. He knew how it erodes your confidence and makes you feel like a burden, and he also knew the healing power of support offered without judgment. So when he stood up and gave his first-class seat to that mother, it wasn't about chivalry. It was an instinct born of his own lived vulnerability. Being a single parent sharpens emotional literacy because there's often no one else to fall back on. There's no partner to divide the emotional labor. Every tantrum, every bedtime story, every scraped knee or school project, it all lands on one set of shoulders. Over time, this repetitive engagement with another human's emotional world builds a quiet strength and a deep capacity to understand suffering in others. It's not theoretical, it's lived. In educational settings, we often talk about soft skills like empathy, patience, and communication, but we don't always teach where they come from. For a single dad, these aren't soft, they are survival tools. He has to manage his own emotions while guiding a child through theirs. He has to model calm when chaos surrounds him. He has to teach love and boundaries, compassion and accountability, all while bearing the weight of dual roles. This naturally fosters a kind of emotional dexterity that can easily be applied to other social interactions. When that father saw the crying mother, he didn't see an inconvenience. He saw a mirror, a fellow parent drowning in a moment that he too had known. His response wasn't planned or performed. It was instinctual because his life had taught him how much just one act of kindness can matter when you're at your limit. The takeaway here isn't just about the nobility of the gesture. It's about how deeply personal experiences, especially those forged in adversity, can evolve into a refined ability to read emotional cues and respond with compassion. Single parents, through the demands placed upon them, become attuned to emotions in a way that textbooks cannot teach. This story becomes an example of how emotional intelligence, born from the crucible of single parenthood, can ripple outward to impact strangers, and it reminds us to look beyond stereotypes. A single dad is not broken, not missing a piece, but rather strengthened by the weight he carries. He is often the quiet observer, the unnoticed helper, the person who sees what others miss. And when the opportunity comes to act from that emotional clarity, he does so without hesitation, not because he's a hero, but because he's human. And in that humanity lies the most powerful form of intelligence there is. Social stereotypes are powerful and often invisible forces that shape how we perceive people before they even speak or act. One of the most deeply ingrained stereotypes is that of the emotionally detached father or the absent single dad. Society tends to place emotional caregiving in the realm of mothers, casting fathers, especially single fathers, as either heroic anomalies or emotionally incapable of nurturing. But when a single dad gives up his first-class seat for a crying mother and her baby without saying a word, he disrupts that stereotype completely. His quiet act of empathy confronts our assumptions and reveals the problem with labeling people based on outdated ideas rather than their lived humanity. We are conditioned to expect that a crying baby will be soothed by a mother, that the challenges of parenting rest squarely on a woman's shoulders, and that men, especially single men, are not emotionally equipped to care for young children, let alone other parents. But the truth is, nurture is not gendered. Compassion, patience, selflessness, these are not biologically assigned qualities. They are learned, practiced, and often sharpened by life experiences, including the unique challenges of single parenthood. When we witness a single father recognizing the silent struggle of a stranger and acting to relieve a burden, it challenges the assumption that only women possess maternal sensitivity. It also reminds us that men can deeply understand and feel the weight of emotional labor. This particular father saw a crying baby and a distressed mother, and rather than becoming annoyed or indifferent, as the stereotype might predict, he acted with quiet understanding. That moment speaks volumes, not only about his character, but about the depth of emotion and awareness that men are often not credited for. Educationally, this calls for a re-examination of how we portray gender roles in both formal and informal learning environments. From children's books and cartoons to school projects and cultural norms, the message is too often the same. Dads are fun, moms are caregivers, fathers are providers, mothers are nurturers. This binary leaves little room for reality and even less for emotional complexity. By reinforcing these ideas, we limit not only how we see others, but how we allow others to see themselves. A boy who watches his father care with gentleness learns that sensitivity is not weakness. A girl who sees her dad handle emotions with maturity learns that strength includes vulnerability. The act of this single father on a plane isn't just a kind moment, it's a lesson in representation. When we share stories like this, we help dismantle stereotypes by replacing abstract generalizations with real, life nuance. It's no longer about what dads don't do. It becomes about what this dad did, And that single story starts to chip away at the larger, inaccurate narrative. Stereotypes also affect the support that single fathers receive. Many face judgment when seeking parenting resources, counseling, or community involvement, simply because systems are not designed to include them as equal caregivers. Their emotional labor is often invisible, undervalued, or dismissed. Yet when we witness their strength in quiet, everyday moments, like giving up a comfortable seat so that a stranger's burden might be lighter, we begin to understand that caregiving is not a performance but a commitment. A commitment that single fathers fulfill every day, whether seen or unseen. Moreover, when we challenge stereotypes, we open the door to more authentic human connections. If passengers on that plane had seen the man and assumed he was just another businessman, unwilling to be disturbed, they would have missed the beauty of his act. Instead, they saw someone who disrupted expectations not with words, but with empathy in motion. The real lesson here is that we need to shift our thinking from who is supposed to care to who chooses to care. And often, the people who choose to care are the ones who have themselves carried invisible burdens. The single father, long misunderstood, misrepresented, or overlooked, becomes a symbol not of brokenness, but of balance, a man who carries both strength and softness, wisdom and warmth. And in showing up for a stranger, he reminds us that human decency isn't defined by roles or labels, but by choices made when no one is asking. Modeling altruism for children is one of the most powerful, lasting lessons a parent can offer. Children learn far more from what they observe than from what they are told. When a child watches a parent act with kindness, especially when it involves sacrifice, that behavior doesn't just register as a good deed, it plants a seed. Over time, these seeds grow into the child's moral compass, shaping how they respond to the world and treat others. In the case of a single dad giving up his first-class seat to a struggling mother and baby, the act isn't just a moment of kindness, it's a legacy of empathy being built in real time. Children observe everything. They notice how adults react to stress, how they treat people in vulnerable situations, how they prioritize others' needs, and whether they choose kindness when it's inconvenient. In this situation, the child of the father who stood up from first class might not fully understand the gesture in the moment. They might even wonder why their father gave up a comfortable seat. But over time, that action becomes part of their internal narrative, something they will recall when they see someone else in need, when they're faced with the decision to give or withhold help. When parents practice altruism, they create a value system that is based not on what is gained, but on what is given. This is especially powerful in a world that often rewards self-interest and ambition over compassion and selflessness. In a society where success is frequently measured by status, wealth, or recognition, an act like giving up a first-class seat teaches a completely different metric: success as the ability to make someone else's life a little better, even if no one notices. For single parents, this modeling carries even greater weight. Without a second adult in the home to balance and reinforce values, every action they take becomes even more significant in shaping the child's emotional and ethical foundation. When that parent shows kindness to strangers, humility in victory, or grace in hardship, the child absorbs those behaviors as natural responses to life. It's not about making a speech or explaining every decision. It's about consistently choosing to be the kind of person you hope your child becomes. In this story, the father's choice to help the mother and baby wasn't done for show. There was no announcement, no audience. He didn't explain his reasoning or seek approval. But what he did accomplish was more profound than words. He demonstrated that kindness is not limited to big moments or grand gestures. It is in the quiet willingness to trade your comfort for someone else's peace, and when a child sees that behavior, they are far more likely to carry it forward, not as a lesson memorized, but as a way of being. This kind of modeling also teaches children that compassion does not discriminate. The father helped a stranger, not someone he knew, not someone who could pay him back. It teaches that humanity transcends personal benefit. It helps children recognize that the world is interconnected and that we all share a responsibility to look out for one another. This idea is central to building emotionally intelligent, socially responsible individuals. Additionally, when parents act selflessly in front of their children, it strengthens the parent-child bond. The child sees their parent not just as an authority figure, but as a role model of courage and heart. They understand that strength can coexist with softness, and that doing what is right often means giving up something for yourself. It helps them internalize the belief that love is not just a feeling, it is something we do, especially when it's hard. In the long run, these moments of modeled altruism become the most enduring gifts a parent can give. They are not material, but moral. They shape not just how a child treats others, but how they view themselves and their role in the world. A child raised with such examples may grow into an adult who steps up when others turn away, who gives without expecting, and who understands that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is offer your seat, not because you have to, but because someone else needs it more. And that is the kind of human the world desperately needs. Emotional intelligence over entitlement is one of the most critical lessons a person can learn, and it often emerges most powerfully in moments of choice, when someone has the option to act with privilege or with empathy. In our modern culture, entitlement often goes unnoticed because it's cloaked in convenience and normalized by social systems. People with access to luxury, comfort, or status can easily become conditioned to expect those benefits without question. First-class seating on an airplane is one such example. It represents more than just space and service. It symbolizes a societal hierarchy, a sense of earned or purchased importance. So, when someone willingly gives up that status for the sake of another, especially someone in distress, it reveals something profound. Emotional intelligence has trumped entitlement. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions, while also recognizing and responding to the emotions of others. It requires self-awareness, empathy, and the ability to take perspective. In the story of the single dad giving up his seat, we see this intelligence in full expression. He wasn't obligated to move. No one demanded it. In fact, everything around him, the seat, the silence, the expectations of first class, said he had every right to stay. But he didn't, because emotional intelligence allows people to step outside of their entitlement and ask a deeper question. What does someone else need right now more than I need to be comfortable? This shift in thinking is essential in raising not only emotionally mature individuals, but also a society that values connection over convenience. Entitlement is often rooted in scarcity thinking, the belief that if I give something up, I lose something of myself. Emotional intelligence, on the other hand, comes from abundance. It recognizes that true worth isn't in what we keep, but in what we are willing to give. The man in this story did not become less by giving up his seat. In fact, he became more human, more compassionate, more connected to those around him. We see emotional entitlement every day in people refusing to let someone ahead in line, in drivers reacting with anger instead of patience, in the way we treat service workers, or in how we respond to children in public spaces. But we also have moments to interrupt that pattern. The father on that flight chose to disrupt it by making a different choice. He didn't see the crying baby as a disturbance. He saw a moment of human need. And that's what emotional intelligence allows us to do, to recognize that someone else's discomfort doesn't diminish our worth. It invites our compassion. This lesson is vital in both personal and professional settings. In schools, children need to be taught that being first or having more doesn't make them better. It gives them a greater opportunity to help. In leadership, bosses need to know that status without sensitivity creates fear, not respect. And in families, parents must show that the real measure of maturity is not in demanding one's rights, but in being willing to sacrifice them for someone else's well-being. The act of giving up a first-class seat may seem small, but symbolically it carries enormous weight. It says, I see you, and your pain matters more than my privilege. It's a refusal to be governed by the rules of entitlement and a choice to be led by empathy instead. And the beauty of emotional intelligence is that it multiplies. One act can ripple outward, changing how others on that flight felt, how they acted, and perhaps even how they view their own roles in the world. Ultimately, emotional intelligence is not just a personal skill, it is a social force. When people prioritize it over entitlement, communities become kinder, systems become fairer, and human connection deepens. In a world where people are often taught to chase more comfort, more recognition, more control, it's emotionally intelligent individuals who remind us that sometimes the greatest value comes in giving something up. That's where true strength lies, not in holding on to privilege, but in letting it go to lift someone else. In a world saturated with social media, instant news, and curated personal branding, the line between genuine kindness and performative virtue has grown increasingly thin. Acts of generosity, once quiet gestures of human connection, are now often framed for likes, shares, and validation. But real integrity does not need an audience. The difference between performative goodness and authentic character is rooted in intention, in quiet sacrifice, and in the consistency of one's actions when no one is watching. When a single father gave up his first-class seat for a struggling mother and her crying baby, without a camera in sight or a post to share, he embodied this difference. His decision was not about visibility, it was about values. The distinction here is critical to understand, especially in educational terms. Character education is not about teaching children to act good in public, but to be good in private. It is about internalizing a moral compass that guides behavior regardless of whether there is applause. In a world where children are increasingly exposed to good deeds that go viral, they must also learn the value of doing the right thing even when no one will ever know. That's what integrity is, doing what's right simply because it's right. The father in this story did not seek recognition. He didn't ask the flight attendants to make an announcement, didn't document his sacrifice, didn't tell others to follow his example. His action was rooted in empathy, not ego. And that is what makes it powerful. In a time when public gestures often come with private motives, his quiet decision cuts through the noise. It's a reminder that the most meaningful acts of humanity are not the ones that trend, but the ones that transform people, moments, and perspectives. Integrity is built through small, consistent actions. It's shaped by how we treat others in line at the store, how we speak about people who aren't present, how we respond when someone is struggling and no one else is stepping in. It's not glamorous, and it often goes unnoticed. But over time, these quiet choices form a foundation of character that is strong, trustworthy, and deeply human. This kind of character doesn't need a stage because its impact is felt, not seen. Furthermore, integrity is especially important in parenting and leadership. Children, students, and young professionals are watching the adults around them not for what they say, but for what they do. When a parent sacrifices comfort without complaint, they model selflessness. When a leader admits mistakes without shifting blame, they model accountability. These are not performative moments, they are formative ones. They shape values and expectations more deeply than any lecture or reward system ever could. The beauty of this father's action lies in its simplicity. There was no drama, no announcement, just a quiet recognition that someone else needed what he had more. That's the essence of real character. It doesn't ask, will this make me look good? It asks, what does love look like in this moment? And love, in its truest form, is rarely flashy. It's the open hand, the offered seat, the understanding glance. It is presence without performance. In educational environments, this lesson should be woven into every subject. How we treat our classmates, how we engage in group projects, how we talk about others. True integrity shows up in how we show up. Not just for ourselves, but for each other. And just like in the story of the father on the plane, it often means stepping down so someone else can rise. Not because we are less valuable, but because we understand that value isn't lost when shared. So, as we raise the next generation, let us celebrate not just the visible acts of kindness, but the invisible ones. Let us encourage not just doing good, but being good. Let us teach that character is not measured by views or comments, but by what we do when no one is watching. Because those are the moments that define us, not on a screen, but in the hearts of others, where the echoes of true integrity live on.